Hello, YouTube. This is going to be the second part to the teleportation series. Um, I'm sorry it's taken me a while to get this uploaded. There was a couple of videos that I wanted to get out, just very pertinent videos before this one, but we shall carry on here. This is some great information. Um, as we continue from before, this is a document from the Air Force Research Laboratory, um, putting out several types of teleportation, ways to go about teleporting inanimate and animate matter from one place to another. We've been through several ways up to this point, from Stargates to quantum tunneling, entanglement to string theory. We've been through just about everything. This is my favorite. This is psychokinesis. That's what PK stands for. It is teleportation using the mind. I have made several videos that you can find on the Rocket City Revolution channel documenting Harvard, Princeton, several other institutions doing great work and experiments in telekinesis, clairvoyance, remote viewing, abilities of the mind that we all possess that we have been lied to about. We've been told that they are paranormal, sorcery, witchcraft, woo woo, hoodoo, voodoo, um, things that are anti Christian. You know, how can it be anti Christian and anti God if God gave you the ability to do it? Why would you have this ability if you weren't supposed to have it? God would not have given you the ability to do these things if you weren't supposed to. It all comes down with intent. What you intend to do with the ability is what matters. Do you intend to lift up the Spirit of God? Do you intend to glorify the Lord? Do you intend to invoke the Holy Spirit and show the people that God is real? The Holy Spirit is in you, and through God and through the Holy Spirit, you are able to do fantastic things. Or do you intend to lift up the devil and invoke demons and participate in Satanism and witchcraft and glorify Lucifer? It's all about intention, okay? And as far as earthly matters go, you know, we are here on this earth. We have dominion over the earth and the animals and the vessel that you occupy. Mental power is just that. It's mental power. It's like you can gain it just like you would go to the gym and work out your muscles for physical power. Okay? It's the same principle. You just have to know what workout methods to use to strengthen your mental powers. Okay? There's a good book by a gentleman by the name of Franz Barden. Franz Barden was a magician and a hermeticist back in the 40s, 30s, and 40s. He was a Jewish man. He was captured by the SS Nazis and forced to teach the SS troops magic. His magic was so powerful that Hitler put out a APB on him, like a reward for finding him, and he was captured and brought in and forced to train troops in magic. That's how powerful his magic was. He was recruited to work for the SS, and he wrote a book called Initiation to Hermetics, and it goes through and teaches you mental exercises to start out with. It starts you out from the very scratch of path work, which is just basic concentration exercises, focus exercises, exercises on developing your mental abilities, natural abilities that we all possess, such as telekinesis, clairvoyance, remote viewing. Um, you can get into other things past that, but, and that's what this is going to go into, this document here. So let's read on. Teleportation is a form of psychokinesis similar to telekinesis, but generally used to designate the movement of objects called apoports through other physical objects or over great distances. Telekinesis is a form of PK which describes the movement of stationary objects without the use of any known physical force. And PK is essentially the direct influence of mind on matter without any known intermediate physical energy or instrumentation. Rigorously controlled modern scientific laboratory PK and related psychic, aka paranormal or parapsychology research has been performed and or documented by Rhine, Schmidt, Mitchell. See also references cited therein: Swan, Puthoff, Targ, Hasted, Targ and Puthoff, going down. A well-known theoretical experimental operational program directed by H.E. Puthoff, Targ E. May and I. Swan was conducted at SRI International and the NSA and sponsored at various times by the Central Intelligence Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the Army Intelligence and Security Command, INSCOM, over more than 2 decades. And the program was later carried on by EMA at SAIC through 97 and 2002. This was called the Remote Viewing Program, and it was a compartmentalized special access program possessing a variety of code names during its 22 years of operation. Remote viewing involves precognition and clairvoyance, and it allows a practitioner to acquire information irrespective of intervening distance or time. The remote viewing program ended in 94, and President W.J. Clinton officially declassified it in 95. The reader should note that the very first U.S. military intelligence research and development programs on psychokinesis, and mind control were conducted by H.K. Puaric during his military service at the Army Chemical and Biological Warfare Center at Fort Detrick, Maryland, in the 40s and 50s. Purik had an interest in clairvoyance and psychokinesis and dabbled in theories for electronically and pharmaceutically enhancing and synthesizing psychic abilities. While in the Army, Purik, I hope I'm saying that right, Purik took part in a variety of parapsychology experiments, and he lectured Army, Air Force, and Navy groups on possibilities for mind warfare. He was a recognized expert in hypnotism and microelectronics. PK phenomenon was also explored in the remote viewing program. Colonel J.B. Alexander credits professional aerospace engineer Jack Hope for capturing PK phenomenon and transitioning it into an observable form. Through 2003, during the past 3 decades, Hoke, along with Alexander, held a number of PK sessions whereby attendees are taught the PK induction process and initiate their own PK events using various mental specimens, forks, spoons, etc. Individuals were able to completely bend or contort their metal specimens with no physical force being applied whatsoever. Numerous government science advisors and senior military officials took part in and or witnessed these events, which took place at the Pentagon, at officers' or scientists' homes, and at one quarterly INSCOM retreat attended by the commanding general and a group of colonels and generals commanding INSCOM units around the globe. Spontaneous deformation of the metal specimens was observed at the PK session conducted during the INSCOM retreat, causing a great deal of excitement among those present. Other notable trained observers were also present at this session, and they critically reviewed the events. Psychic Uri Geller is the original model for demonstrating PK metal bending. Yeah, I want to stop right there for a second, because there was a man named Randy, Jim or John Randy, that around, I don't know, the 80s, 90s, he put out a $1 million reward for anybody that could produce conclusive, irrefutable proof, evidence of psychic ability of any kind, telekinesis, any kind. And he also made several documentaries and wrote a book reporting that he had reviewed, researched, and debunked all of the psychics, mediums, magicians. There was no real psychic phenomenon going on from any of these people, that it was that up to him, up to this date, there was no proof, evidence, or lab experimentation data that proved any of it was real. Okay? And a lot of people took him seriously and used him as a credible source, as a lot of skeptics, a lot of research people disregarded the phenomenon and all of these people, especially Uri Geller, as a farce, but on Randy's word. Okay? Well, he was a disinformation officer put out to throw people off, because Uri Geller went on national TV and was flaunting his abilities around and was turning a lot of people onto this stuff. And at the time, the military was wanting to use this as a tactic for warfare, um, tools for their special commands, for their SEAL teams and their special forces soldiers. They didn't want the average Joe knowing how to use his mind to teleport cars from, from one state to the other, or bending metal objects with their mind, or um, reading people's thoughts, or um, predicting the future, having astral projection, remote viewing, all of these things. They wanted to keep it under wraps. And Uri Geller was, he went on Johnny Carson and was not able to perform on the show because Johnny Carson put out a whole slew of metal objects. And I think Uri Geller could have done it, but I think that he was told by the CIA to stop performing in public, and he wanted the recognition and wanted the fame and wanted the spotlight, so he went on with the show, but he didn't perform on the show, but he still got that recognition of being a famous guy. But he went on to to um, to be the number one remote viewer for special operations for the government. He taught slews of troops and people how to remote view sites for the military, how to he was documented 100% by the government. The papers are declassified now, that he was able to make objects appear and disappear, which we will get into that in a minute. I just wanted to, a lot of people, when they hear Uri Geller, they automatically throw their hands up and say, oh, well, Randy, all these people, they debunked him. They didn't debunk him. Randy was a disinformation person for the government that was put out to throw the average public off of this phenomenon because they wanted it for themselves. They wanted to keep it for special operations and to use on other countries for spying and reconnaissance and things of this nature. So that said, let's go on. PK metal psychic Uri Geller in 75 is the original model for demonstrating PK metal bending. During a talk that he gave at the U.S. Capitol building, Uri caused a spoon to curve upward with no force applied, and then the spoon continued to bend after he put it back down on and walked away and continued with his talk. And this was in 96. Jack Hope continues doing extensive experimental work and data collection on micro and macro PK phenomena. Scientifically controlled PK experiments at the Princeton University Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory were conducted by Robert John, Dean Emeritus of the School of Engineering, who reported that repeatedly consistent results in mentally affecting material substances has been demonstrated in the lab in 87. In the 80s, John attended a meeting on the PK topic at the Naval Research Laboratory and warned that foreign adversaries could exploit micro or macro PK to induce U.S. military fighter pilots to lose control of their aircraft and crash. Very early investigations of and experiments on teleportation occurred during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Many cases that were studied and the experiments that were performed were undoubtedly due to fraud, and a few experiments have occurred under controlled conditions during that period. However, most of the credible scientific reports of psychic teleportation phenomenon and related controlled experiments occurred in the late 20th century. Some of that scientific work involved the investigation of Uri Geller and a variety of other recruitment spontaneous PK phenomenon. Psychics Uri Geller and Ray Stanford claimed to have been teleported on several occasions. Most claimed instances of human teleportation of the body from one place to another have been unwitnessed. There are also a small number of credible reports of individuals who reported being teleported to from UFOs during a UFO close encounter, which were scientifically investigated, but there are a larger number of such reports that are anecdotal, whereby the witnesses' data tends to be unreliable. However, we will confine our discussion to the controlled laboratory experiments that have been performed and reported. One of the more interesting examples of controlled experiments with Uri Geller was one in which he was able to cause a part of a vanadium carbide crystal to vanish. The crystal was encapsulated so it could not be touched, and it was placed in such a way that it could not be switched with another crystal by sleight of hand. A more spectacular series of rigorously controlled and repeatable laboratory experiments occurred in the People's Republic of China in September of '81. An extraordinary paper was published in the People's Republic of China in the journal Nature Journal, and this paper was entitled "Some Experiments on the Transfer of Objects Performed by Unusual Abilities of the Human Body." The paper reported that gifted children were able to cause the apparent teleportation of small objects, radio microtransmitters, photosensitive paper, mechanical watches, horseflies, and other insects, etc., from one location to another that was meters away, without them ever touching the objects beforehand. The experiments were operated under exceptionally well-controlled conditions, both blind and double-blind. The researchers involved included not only observers from various People's Republic of China colleges and medical research institutes, but also representatives from the National Defense Science Commission. Because of the involvement of the latter, it was deemed necessary that an unclassified intelligence information report be prepared by the DIA, which included a detailed English translation of the article. Additional research carried out by the Aerospace Medicine Engineering Institute in Beijing was reported in July of '90 issue of the China Journal of Somatic Science, which was also translated into English by the DIA, reported in several articles, are experiments involving the videotaping and high-speed photography of the transfer of test specimens, nuts, bundles of matches, pills, nails, thread, photosensitive paper, chemically treated paper, sponges dipped in FEs, CI, etc., through the walls of sealed paper envelopes, double layered something type paper bags, sealed glass bottles and tubes with sealed caps, and sealed plastic film canisters, without the walls of any of these containers being breached. All of the Chinese experiments reported using gifted children and young adults who possessed well-known extraordinary PK ability to cause the teleportation of the various test specimens in all the experimental cases that were reported The test specimens that were teleported were completely unaltered or unchanged from their initial state. Even the insects were unaffected by being teleported. The experiments were well controlled, scientifically recorded, and the experimental results were always repeatable. The Chinese papers are all extremely interesting and very well written, and they show photographs and schematic diagrams of the various experimental setups. The experimental protocols were explained in lengthy detail, and through data and statistical analysis were presented in the results. The combined results for the several Chinese experiments showed that different research groups designed different experimental protocols, used different gifted psychics, used different sealed containers, different test specimens, live insects, bulk inanimate objects, even radio microtransmitters were used to track the location of the specimens that were to be teleported. The time required for the teleportation of the test specimens through various barriers was anywhere from a fraction of a second to several minutes, and this was not dependent on the test specimen that was used, the sealed container was not that was used, or its barrier thickness, which experimental protocol was used, or which psychic was being used. The high-speed photography videotaping recorded in one series of experiments that test specimens would physically meld or blend with the walls of sealed containers, and recorded in a different series of experiments, the test specimens would simply disappear from inside the container only to reappear at another location after seconds to several minutes of time transpired, such that the test specimen did not actually undergo total material disintegration, reintegration during teleportation. This data is important because without the aid of electronic monitoring instruments, the average person's sensory organs and usual methods of detection are temporarily unable to perceive the test specimen's ambiguous existence during the teleportation process. So they're like made invisible, but not completely invisible. They're maybe dematerialized, but not like completely out of this realm. I don't know how that goes about, if they're just like made invisible and like cloaked and then moved, or how that is going on, but it's crazy, trippy crazy. And this is a U.S. Air Force document, keep in mind. And this was all double blind tested and recorded. This is the real deal. And Ziegler, I think I'm saying that right, Ziegler, um, anyway, he had a famous comment that said, "What one man can do, another man can do." That means that if one man can do it, any other man or woman can do it. If these people, Chinese kids, can do it, you can do it. It's all a matter of knowing what you're doing and practicing, developing the skill. Just like jujitsu, karate, shooting pool, throwing darts, whatever, playing an instrument, sleight of hand magic. It's all about invested time and intention on the goal and belief. Belief that you are able to do it. You have to believe. If you believe you can do something, you've already done it. The radio microtransmitter used as a test specimen in one series of experiments transmitted a radio signal to several stationary electronic instruments receivers so that the specimen could be tracked and monitored via signal amplitude and frequency measurements. During the teleportation process, the experimenters discovered that there was large fluctuations in the intensity in both amplitude and frequency of the monitored signal, to the effect that it would either completely disappear or become extremely weak to the extent that the monitoring instruments could scarcely detect it. It was discovered that there was a definite correlation between the change in strength, i.e., radical frequency shifts were observed, of the monitored radio signal and the teleportation of the test specimen, such that the weak or absent signal indicated that the specimen was non-existent or in altered physical state during teleportation. Note, the monitored signal amplitude and frequency of the microtransmitter specimen were stable before and after teleportation. Wow. That means that they were putting these things in an alternate dimension and bringing them back. They were phasing them out of this dimension and then bringing them. They were probably putting them into the fourth dimension and then bringing them back, because a lot. It can be said that everything we see here are just shadows of real objects in another dimension. So the fourth dimension is time. Can be said it is time, or the dimension of time. So if you take things out of time or move them through time, it could look like they were disappearing, I suppose. If you took something out of now and then moved it several seconds ahead of us, by the time we caught up with it, it would look like it had disappeared and reappeared. I would think. But who knows how they're doing this? This is, who knows what they're doing here. Before and after passing through the container wall barrier, the test specimen and the container's wall barrier are both complete solid objects. The gifted psychics were never allowed to see. They were blindfolded in many experiments or touch each of the test specimens or the sealed containers before and after experiments were conducted, and only the experimenters touched the specimens and containers using both blind and double-blind protocols. The experimental results were all repeatable. Quantum mechanics allows for this to happen. It is part of our physics that is in our reality. Electrons and photons, atoms, will phase out. They will phase out, they will dislocate and then reappear. They do this, it's like the wave and the particle situation. They phase out and then they phase back in. It's if we could figure this out on a macro scale, because it happens on a micro scale, then we could do exactly what these psychics, these Chinese kids are doing. That's exactly what they're doing. More than likely, is they are just phasing these things out and back in, same as the electrons, atoms do. The conditions for fraud and sleight of hand were totally eliminated, and multiple independent outside witnesses, technical and military intelligence experts, were present at all times to ensure total fidelity of the experiments. Well, that tells you, that's it right there. This was happening. There was no falsehood. So Randy can, take these kids their money right now, because that shit was double blind, documented, witnessed, videotape. They had the whole thing. That's his proof of psychic phenomenon right there. Done. The experimental radio microtransmitter and high-speed photography videotaping data offer an important clue on what the teleportation mechanism is and this will be discussed further in Section 5.1. The Chinese were unable to offer any significant physics hypothesis that could explain their results. Some researchers stated that it is necessary to invoke new physics which somehow unifies the human consciousness, physics of consciousness, with quantum and space-time physics in order to understand psychic teleportation and related psychic kinesis phenomena. The researchers were amazed by the repeated results and were barely able to fathom the altered state of being the test specimens underwent during teleportation. It is also important to point out that during the Cold War, the DIA produced 3 now declassified reports on the parapsychology research of the Soviet Union and its Warsaw Pact allies. The DIA report, other related studies were reported by Growler. The purpose of the reports was to collate and summarize collected intelligence, describe in great detail, and assess the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact research and development on parapsychology and parapsychics, paraphysics. The reports outline the history of pre-revolutionary Russian and World War II, post-World War II era Soviet research and development on psychotronics, human mind, behavior control, and an entire spectrum of parapsychology. The Soviet information also mentions the psychotronic parapsychology research and development materials the Soviet military forces took from various Nazi research centers in and around Germany at the end of World War II. The entire spectrum of parapsychology phenomenon was explored by the Soviets, which resulted in the generation of a wealth of experimental data and related scientific research literature. One DIA report noted that there was an East versus West science debate in the Soviet literature over whether paranormal phenomena and related experimental data was real or even scientifically sound in comparison to Western scientific practice and philosophy. Another DIA report lists the names and affiliations of all the researchers, as well as names of the various Soviet and Warsaw Pact research centers that were involved. Also, Pratt reviews and summarizes the history of Soviet psychotronics research. The U.S. military intelligence establishment was concerned with the possibility the Soviets and Warsaw Pact allies were conducting psychotronics and mind control research and development in order to discover how to exploit and control powerful phenomenon that could be used against U.S. and the Allies. Lamoth chronicled how the Soviets had been researching methods of influencing human behavior for over 60 years. You think they didn't know some stuff by then? Yeah. The Soviets and their allies extensively explored and influenced technology that they called controlled offensive behavior. COB, COB, which is defined as research on human vulnerability as it applies to methods of influencing or altering human behavior. Describes the revolutionary techniques the Soviets studied to influence human behavior, which included sound, light, color, odors, sensory deprivation, sleep, electromagnetic fields, biochemicals, autosuggestion, hypnosis, and parapsychology phenomenon, such as psychokinesis, telekinesis, extrasensory perception, ESP, astral projection, clairvoyance, precognition, and dream state, etc. Report became an aid in the development of countermeasures for the protection of U.S. and or Allied personnel. Psychotronics is the general term that was used in the former Soviet Union Warsaw Pact countries to categorize many psychic phenomena undergoing scientific research. The conclusions that were reached in the DIA reports are that within the category of psychotronics, the Soviets identified two discrete skills: bioenergetics, those phenomena associated with the production of objectively detectable effects such as psychokinesis, telekinesis, levitation effects, transformations of energy, i.e., the altering or affecting of matter. Bioinformation, the phenomena associated with the obtaining of information through means other than the normal sensory channels, i.e., extrasensory perception, such as telepathy, precognition, and clairvoyance, i.e., using the mind to tap into the thoughts of others or to acquire present or future information about objects, events in the world. Now, you tell me they didn't know they weren't doing some stuff, man. That's just some, you know, these phenomenon evolve using the mind and or some field of the body to affect other minds and inanimate objects irrespective of intervening distance or elapsed time, and without engaging any conventional tools. Bioenergetics and bioinformation are two classifications that form a single branch of science the Soviets preferred to call biocommunications. Soviet biocommunications research is primarily concerned with exploring the existence of a definite group of natural phenomena controlled by laws that are not based on any known energetic influence. The types of biocommunication, aka psychotronics phenomenon, include special sensory biophysical activities, brain and mind control, telepathic communications or bioinformation, transceiving, bioluminescent, and bioenergetic emissions, and the effects of altered states of consciousness on the human psyche. Psychotronics and remote viewing provide capabilities that have obvious intelligence applications. The Soviets and their I like saying this, like Worcestershire sauce, packed allies invested millions of dollars in psychotronics R&D because they understood this and saw the potential payoff for military and intelligence applications. Of course, I mean, hell, if you can have your soldiers um, being psychics, able to read people's minds, project themselves all around the world to view targets, project themselves into the interior of enemy camps to find vulnerabilities, insecurity. I mean, God, the bioluminescence. If I look over and I see somebody glowing, I'm gonna drop my weapons. If I see a crew of soldiers coming up on me and they're all glowing, I'm throwing my shit down. I don't care, you know. Um, the U.S. response of Soviet psychotronics R&D programs was the remote viewing program. In addition, the U.S. Army began the Jedi Project in '83. Oh, how quaint! Which sought to increase human potential using teachable models of behavioral, physical excellence by unconventional means. Teachable models of behavioral, physical excellence, I think it meant excellence, by unconventional means. 1990, the Jedi Project was essentially a human performance modeling experiment based on neuro-linguistic programming, NLP skills, which are very real. Um, I've had, I'm trained in some of that. I have used it, and actually, I learned the skill while under the influence of LSD before I even knew what it was. Under the influence of LSD, I was able to manipulate people around me using words in a way like I was playing with a cat with a string, is the best way I can describe it. And I didn't know what I was doing. It was almost like a god complex, is the best way I don't mean to be blasphemous. Um, but that's the best way I can describe it. And then I learned later what NLP was, and that's basically um, that to a on steroids, but whereby advanced influence technologies to model excellence in human performance was used. The program ran under the auspices of the Army, here we go again, INSCOM, and the Organizational Effectiveness School. I would love to go through that. Organizational Effectiveness School. And was sponsored by the U.S. government Interagency Task Force. Finally, it should be pointed out that the program had successfully trained several hundred people, including members of Congress such as Al Gore Jr. and Tom Downey. Al Gore Jr. The hell? Members of Congress? What are these old dirtbags up there? They just wanted to go through. They just wanted to be cool and learn some Jedi mind tricks, how to get in the little girl's panties from just through NLP before being terminated. There's a wealth of factual scientific research data from around the world attesting to the physical reality of psychic teleportation and related anomalous psi phenomena. The skeptical reader should not be so quick to dismiss the subject matter in this chapter, because one must remain open-minded about the subject and consider psychic teleportation as worthy of further scientific exploration. Well, of course, if you just hung with me through this past few paragraphs, there's no way that you could remain a skeptic, complete skeptic, because it's been documented, verified, videotaped by the government, millions of dollars invested, multiple government agencies ran hundreds of people through the training, so obviously there was some benefits they were gaining from this stuff, you know. The psychotronics topic is controversial within the Western scientific community. The debate among scientists and scientific philosophers is highly charged at times and becomes acrimonious to the point where reputable skeptical scientists cease being impartial by refusing to examine the experimental data or theories, and they prefer to bypass rational discourse by engaging in ad hominem attacks and irrational armchair arguments. Well, that's just the way it goes. People have cognitive dissonance. They don't want to believe, or they are trained to not believe in things that are outside the realm of the textbook, the realm of what is taught in the classroom. They can't think outside the box. They're trained to not think outside the box. People are go through university and are trained to be one-dimensional. They're not critical thinkers. Critical thinking is not something that's taught in Western academia. Um, you know, it's it's part of the Auschwitz um, academic. What do you call it? Robotic indoctrination. The oh man, not the Shriner, but the educational institute. I forget the name of it now, but they basically went through and worked out a common core indoctrination education program that is our public education system today. Um, Man, I can't think of the group that did that, but yeah, that's what it is. There is no outside the box thinking. If you want to think outside the box, you become a theoretical physicist, and even the theoretical physicists are so one-dimensional, and that's ironic, but they are they can't think beyond what is material science, what is taught as material science. Um, we should be, first of all, 70 years ago, we had anti-gravity technology in our hands. Okay, that's no doubt about that. Okay, 0 point energy was discovered and used by Nikola Tesla. His line of thinking through vibration, frequency, and sound, somatics, energy, vibration, and frequency. Those are are things that are looked over, and a blind eye is turned to this line of physics. Why? I can only think that it's the oil cabal, but even then, if there were men there, I think that for the greater good of humanity, these technologies would be pursued and put out, at least in some degree, they would be put out. Some 0 point perpetual motion energy, free energy devices would be there. I have to believe that there is a non-human entity or force at the top of this pyramid that is disallowing the proper the 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 constructive patents and inventions and this things that would make our species sustainable for a longer period of time. um that there has to be an entity that's stopping us from progressing in these areas, because if it was a human being would want to further the race of the human beings. We would not want to destroy our planet. We There would be more of a look toward the future, toward our children, and that's not what is happening. There is no future foresight in what we're doing to ourselves right now. The continued use of fossil fuels and um, unsustainable development and these plastics and all of this stuff that is just destroying us as a species and making our planet suffer and stifling the evolution of our consciousness. I can't see it just going on for this long unless there was a non-human entity at the top You know, there has to be. Something is up there that does not want us to progress and be a free, evolving society. Um, and I see bad things on the rise. I mean, there's not a good outcome. The damn Federal Reserve is a prime example. Who in the hell would put up such a Ponzi scheme for the American public to live off of if they were human beings? No human being would go for that shit this long and perpetuate it and put us into debt. No aspirations, a work a day occupation, just get an occupation. You know what an occupation is? Break it down the etymology of the word. It's to occupy you, to occupy your time, to keep you occupied, not inspired, not um, intellectually challenged, not progressing, not expanding your mind or consciousness. Just occupy you while you're being fed off of vampires, vampirized for your energy, kept at a low vibrational red base chakra state so you can't progress at all. In the past 6,000 years, we have not progressed at all, really, consciously, to a level that we should be. At this point, we should have free energy. There should be no fossil fuels. We should have cars and things running on water. I can make a system right now with a couple of roughed up pieces of metal and some water to get Brown's gas and make a torch that expels water. Is you know that there's so many ways with magnetism and things of that nature, the electric universe, the chi energy ether that's all around us to make us all sustainable and free. It's just ridiculous that we're not doing it. There has to be something nefarious, insidious, and parasitic that's taking control and keeps propagating this torturous enslavement of our species. I mean, it has to be that way. That I'm sorry to go on a rant, but that's just the way it is. Um, the Chinese researchers reported in their teleportation experiments that high-speed recorded test specimens physically melding or blending with the walls of sealed containers, and in a different series of experiments, the test specimens would simply disappear from inside the container only to reappear at another location after seconds to several minutes of time transpired. They also reported in a series of radio microtransmitter experiments that there were large fluctuations in the intensity in both the amplitude and frequency of the monitored signal of the effect that it would either completely disappear, become extremely weak. We read this earlier. This is just more of what I read earlier. Just things that you can't explain. The only way you can explain it is psychic ability, you know. And that's the rundown of this document. That's 73 of 88. The rest of it is references. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll be posting some more videos, and also I'm about to start doing some podcasts that are commentary, further commentary on the videos on Podbean com. Look for Rocket City Revolution podcasts. And have a nice day.